The salt spray stung my eyes, but I didn't dare slow down. My lungs, older than most of the rocks on this coast, burned with every gasp of the damp dawn air. Beside me, Salty's barks were frantic, a sharp counterpoint to the grinding roar of the engine behind us. "This way, boy, to the water," I shouted, but the old Labrador was already scrambling over the slick granite, his paws sure where my boots slipped. The battered pickup truck, its paint the color of rust and bad intentions, lurched over the uneven ground. 2 men in black ski masks were inside, and their target was clear. They weren't after me. They were trying to cut Salty off, to pin him against the sheer drop where the land fell away into the churning Atlantic. A cold fury, sharper than the wind, cut through my fear. You don't threaten a man's dog, not in Maine, not ever. My eyes scanned the familiar shoreline, the coiled ropes, the lobster traps waiting for the day's haul. Then I saw it, a heavy, weathered fishing buoy, as big as a barrel, tethered to a post. It was meant to mark nets, not to be a weapon, but Preston had left me no choice. "Salty, down!" I bellowed. He flattened himself against the rock just as the truck gunned its engine, aiming for the space between him and the cliff's edge. There was no time for a prayer, only action. My hands, gnarled and weathered from a lifetime of hauling lines, found a strength I'd forgotten they had. I wrapped my arms around the buoy's thick, slimy rope, planted my feet, and with a roar that came from the very depths of my being, I swung it. It was an impossible, weighty arc. The buoy left my hands just as the truck's grill filled my vision. It sailed through the gray morning light and connected with the crash that echoed off the cliffs like a gunshot. The windshield exploded into a spider web of cracks, then caved inward in a shower of glass. The truck swerved violently, its front tire catching on a granite ledge. The engine screamed in protest. For a second, everything was frozen. The masked figure in the passenger seat, staring through the ruined glass, Salty's low growl, the relentless pull of the sea below. "Now, Salty, run!" We didn't look back. We ran, not toward the village, but into the maze of sea caves carved into the cliff base, places only locals and lobsters knew. The sound of the stalled truck and the furious, muffled shouts of the men grew faint behind us, swallowed by the thunder of the waves and the frantic beating of my own heart. We had escaped. But as the adrenaline began to ebb, one chilling thought remained. They knew where to find me, and they knew what I was trying to protect. The smell of old paper and sea salt filled my cottage, a scent as familiar as my own breath. I watched Molly, my friend the librarian, trace a finger along the spine of a first edition Melville. The harbor lights were just starting to twinkle through the big bay window, painting the messy stacks of books in gold. "You look troubled, Silas," she said, not turning from the shelves. "More than usual." I let out a long sigh, the sound getting lost in the quiet hum of the evening. "I suppose I am." I gestured to the worn armchair opposite mine. "Sit, please. Tss. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have confessed a long time ago." She sat, her kind eyes patient behind her glasses. "All this," I said, waving a hand at the crammed bookshelves, the view of the boats bobbing in the dusk. "The reviews call me a reclusive literary treasure. The truth is, I'm just a lonely old man with a trust fund and a typewriter. The fortune came from my family. The words, well, they were my only escape." Molly nodded, understanding without me having to spell it out. "My son, Preston," the name tasted bitter. "He was my greatest disappointment, not because he wasn't clever, he's shrewd as they come, but because his greed eclipsed everything else. Every conversation became a negotiation, every visit an appraisal of my assets." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. After his last visit, filled with more transparent hints about estate planning, I was so heartsick, so utterly fed up. I got up and walked to my locked writing desk, resting a hand on its cool, empty surface. On a whim, a foolish, defiant whim, I took out my old leather-bound diary, the one with the cracked spine, and I wrote a new will, right there in its pages. Molly's eyebrows lifted slightly. I wrote that I was leaving everything, the cottage, the investments, all of it, to Salty. A faint, sad smile touched my lips. Salty was the one-eyed harbor cat who deigned to let me feed him. And I named you, Molly, as the executor, to ensure it was carried out. It was a fantasy, a literary revenge penned by a frustrated old author. I locked it in this desk, thinking it was just a private joke to soothe my pride. I turned to face her fully, the dread I'd been carrying all day, solidifying in my chest. Yesterday, the diary was gone. The lock wasn't broken, but it was gone. Preston has a key to the cottage. He must have come while I was at the post office. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of a gull. My whimsical, written rebellion was no longer a secret. It was a missing document, and somewhere, my son Preston now knew exactly what his bitter old father had thought of him. The screen door's familiar slap was my only warning before a voice, all smooth polish and false warmth, cut through the quiet of the living room. Silas, just the man I was hoping to see. I turned from the kitchen sink, a coffee mug in my hand, to see Preston filling the doorway. He wore one of those expensive-looking casual sweaters, the kind that screams Portland boardroom, not a New England homestead. He hadn't called. He never did. "Preston," I said, keeping my voice flat. "This is a surprise." "A happy one, I hope," he said, stepping inside without an invitation. His eyes did a quick, appraising sweep of the room before landing on Salty, who was curled on his worn rug by the hearth. "And there's my favorite old boy." He moved toward Salty with an exaggerated, open-armed gesture. My dog, usually a sucker for any attention, let out a low, uncertain whine and tucked his head, shrinking back against the bricks. Preston either didn't notice or didn't care. He crouched and ruffled Salty's fur with a force that looked more like a scrub than a pet. "Who's a good guardian of the estate, huh? Yes, you are." It made my skin crawl. Salty's nervous eyes found mine, and I gave him a slight, reassuring nod. Preston stood, brushing non-existent dust from his trousers. "Place is looking solid, Silas. Really solid. It's a lot for one man to manage, though. A real legacy." He paused, letting the word hang. "Have you given any more thought to structuring things? Estate planning?" There it was. So much for small talk. "It's handled," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Family land like this, it's complicated." He pressed on, his smile never wavering. "Taxes, liens, you'd be shocked. I've got a fantastic lawyer in Portland. Family man. He could make sure everything transitions smoothly to the right people." The subtext was as thick as the morning fog over the backfield. He meant himself. He was the only right people he ever considered. "I appreciate the concern," I said, my tone making it clear I did no such thing. His gaze drifted past me then, over to my grandfather's oak desk by the window. It was a habitual glance, one I'd seen before. But this time, his practiced smile flickered. Just for a second. His eyes fixed on the clean, rectangular patch of darker wood on the desk's surface, free of the dust that lightly coated everything else. The exact spot where, for decades, my grandfather's worn, leather-bound diary had always sat. A cold certainty settled in my gut. He wasn't just here for the land. He was looking for that book, and he'd just realized it was gone. The silence in my cottage that night was the heavy, watchful kind. I'd spent the evening poring over the worn leather-bound diary again, the old floorboards creaking under my feet as I paced, trying to piece together why Preston was so desperate to get it back. I finally went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Then I heard it, a faint metallic scratch at my front door. My blood went cold. I lay perfectly still, listening. There it was again, the distinct, careful sound of a lock being tampered with. Before I could even move, a low growl rumbled from the foot of my bed. Then, Salty was off like a shot, a black and white bolt of fury, his barking exploding into the quiet night. It wasn't his usual squirrel bark. This was deep, primal, and furious. The scratching stopped instantly. I heard a muffled curse, then the quick, receding crunch of footsteps on gravel, running away. I rushed to the window in time to see a dark figure vanish into the tree line. My heart hammered against my ribs. Salty stood at the door, hackles still raised, issuing a final warning growl into the darkness. I didn't sleep a wink after that. The next morning, with the sun doing little to chase the chill from my bones, I called Molly. Her voice was steady, calm. "I'm on my way." When she arrived, her librarian's eyes missed nothing. We walked the perimeter of the cottage, and she stopped dead by the living room window. "Silas, look here." There, in the soft, damp earth of the flower bed, was a single, clear boot print. It was deep, as if someone had stood there, leaning, peering in. Molly crouched down, her brow furrowed. "That's a specific tread. Aggressive, deep lugs for hiking." She looked up at me, her expression grim. Preston was boasting about his new, top-of-the-line hiking boots at the Historical Society meeting last week. Said he'd just bought them for the fall foliage tours. A A sick feeling settled in my stomach. We drove straight to the town's little outdoor outfitter. The clerk confirmed it. Preston had indeed purchased those exact boots recently. But when we, as casually as we could, asked if Preston had been in to clean them or ask about where, the clerk shook his head. "Funny thing," he said. "Saw him walking Main Street yesterday. Those new boots of his, they already looked broken in, scuffed, muddy even." The proof was now a physical thing, pressed into the earth outside my home. The expensive, uniquely treaded boots he'd just bought were already worn, and one of them had left its mark in the night, just below my window. This wasn't just about a diary anymore. Preston had brought the threat to my doorstep. The silence in the library's back room was the heavy, thinking kind. Molly had the worn leather-bound diary open between us, her finger tracing the last entry I'd made. "He tried to take Barron the day after this went missing, Silas." I felt a cold clarity wash over me. So someone didn't just steal the diary to be cruel. They read it. They saw me write about the trust fund releasing when I turned 30, all tied to Barron's well-being. And they panicked, Molly finished, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. They realized a paper trail of your plans existed, and they needed to force the issue before you could secure the dog somewhere safer. This wasn't random. It was a reaction. We were detectives now, and our first lead was motive. Who needed quick, untraceable cash in a hurry? The memory of Preston's sneering face, always eyeing the finer things in my family's old house, clicked into place. "Preston," I said, the name tasting bitter. "He's always been obsessed with status. Symbols. He mentioned my grandfather's silver pocket watch once, said it was a crime, it was sitting in a drawer." Molly was already reaching for her coat. "Then let's see if he's been selling his own symbols lately." The local pawn shop, Hartford Hawks, was a cluttered, dimly lit place that smelled of old metal and dust. Mr. Henderson, the owner, knew everyone's business, and, thankfully, he trusted Molly. When she asked casually if he'd seen any interesting silver pieces lately, he didn't hesitate. "Funny you should ask," he grumbled, pulling a ledger from under the counter. "Preston Aldridge was in here just last week. In a right state he was, pawning a beautiful old silver pocket watch, engraved with some sort of crest. Said it was a family heirloom, but he needed cash fast, didn't even haggle much." My heart hammered against my ribs. That was the watch, the one he'd coveted for years. For him to part with it, he must have been desperate. Molly thanked Mr. Henderson, and we stepped back out into the New England afternoon, the pieces locked together with an almost audible click. He read the diary, saw his chance to get the money through Barron slipping away. I said, the anger now a steady, cold flame. So he pawned his prized possession for quick cash, startup capital. "To pay the thugs from the parking lot," Molly nodded, her expression grim. "It fits. He needed hired hands, and that kind of work doesn't come cheap, not even in our quiet corner of the world." We stood there on the sidewalk, the case no longer a mystery of shadows, but a trail of clear, stupid greed. Preston had traded his own history for a shot at stealing mine, and in doing so, he'd left us a receipt. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the view from my kitchen window. I was making a pot of tea, trying to quiet the low hum of dread that had been my constant companion since finding the diary, when a sharp knock echoed through the old house. It was Preston. He didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed the door open, shaking water from his expensive overcoat onto my floor. "Silas, we need to talk." My stomach tightened. "About what?" "About Dad," he said, his voice slick with false concern. He paced my small kitchen like he was already measuring it for demolition. "I'm worried about him, seriously worried. His mental state, it's not stable. And that librarian, Molly?" He shot me a look of pure disdain. "She's filling his head with nonsense, historical conspiracies, old wives' tales. It's an unhealthy influence." I stood my ground, the kettle beginning to whistle a shrill alarm behind me. "Molly's a friend. She's helping us." "Helping you do what, exactly?" Preston stopped, his eyes cold. "Convince a confused old man to leave his entire estate to a dog? That inheritance for Salty isn't charming, Silas. It's proof. It's the clearest evidence I need to file for legal guardianship. The court will see it my way. He's clearly incapable of managing his own affairs." The air left the room. This wasn't about concern. This was a takeover. "You can't do that," I said, but my voice sounded thin, drowned by the rain. "I can, and I will." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to a venomous whisper. and you should think carefully about how hard you fight this. That dog is old, fragile. Accidents happen, Silas, especially to old dogs. It would be a shame if something preventable occurred before the paperwork was even filed. A cold, clear fury washed through me, burning away the fear. He wasn't just after the money or the property anymore. He was threatening Salty, a creature of pure, simple loyalty. My father's last true friend. In that moment, looking at my brother's smug, calculating face, I knew. The time for quietly researching was over. Preston had just drawn a line in the sand, and he'd put Salty on the other side of it. I had to act. Not tomorrow. Now. I had to protect that old dog, and I had to use the truth in that worn, leather-bound diary to expose the man my brother really was, before he could hurt anyone else. The confrontation I'd been dreading was no longer a possibility. It was here. The salt air of the harbor was thick, buzzing with the energy of the Lobster Festival. I stood near the main stage, the scent of butter and Old Bay seasoning doing nothing to settle my nerves. In my pocket, the worn leather-bound diary felt like a live coal. This was it. The trap was set. I'd called Preston an hour ago, my voice dripping with the defeated resignation I'd practiced in the mirror. "It's over," I'd said, the words ash in my mouth. "You win. I can't fight you in the town anymore. Meet me at the festival. I'll sign whatever new papers you want, in front of everyone. Let's just make it official." I could almost hear his smug smile through the phone. Public, legal confirmation of his inheritance. It was the one thing he craved more than the land itself. The validation. The applause. As soon as I hung up, I found Molly by the Historical Society booth, her eyes wide with concern behind her glasses. The crowd swirled around us, a sea of people laughing and clutching paper trays. I leaned in close, the festival noise covering my whisper. "Spread the rumor," I told her, my hand resting on my pocket. "Say I found my great-grandfather's diary. Say I'm going to make a big announcement about the true heir at the festival. Make sure it gets back to him." She nodded, a fierce, understanding look replacing her worry. She melted into the crowd, a quiet librarian turned secret agent. Her mission to make our bait irresistible. Now I waited. I watched families pose for pictures by lobster traps, felt the thump of the local band's bass line through the wooden planks under my feet. Every glimpse of a dark suit in the crowd made my heart stutter. I was pretending to capitulate, but every fiber of me was taut, a spring coiled and ready. And then I saw him. Preston moved through the crowd like a shark. People instinctively parting for his expensive suit and severe expression. He carried a leather folio, no doubt containing his new papers. His eyes locked on mine from across the square, and he offered a thin, triumphant smile. He'd heard the rumor. Of course he had. The promise of that diary, and the public spectacle of my surrender, had drawn him right into the heart of the town he sought to control. He believed he was walking toward his victory stage. My palms were sweaty, but I didn't wipe them. I just stood my ground, the weight of the diary against my thigh, and met his gaze. The trap was baited. The villain had taken the hook. Now we just had to reel him in. The air on the festival stage was thick with the smell of fried dough and anticipation. The whole town of our little coastal village was packed onto the green, their faces turned up towards me and Preston. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I didn't have the deeds or the surveys in my hands. Instead, my fingers were wrapped tight around a chunky, black marine radio. Preston stood a few feet away, his usual smug grin plastered on his face, thinking he'd already won. He'd expected me to come begging with paperwork. He didn't know about the long night Molly and I had spent at the library, cross-referencing pawnshop receipts, or about the quiet conversation I'd had with a very scared man in a holding cell down at the county sheriff's office. "Well, Silas?" Preston's voice boomed through the microphone, all false cheer. "Come to finally admit defeat? To hand over what's rightfully mine?" I looked past him, to the crowd. I saw Molly near the front, her hands clasped tightly, giving me a small, firm nod. This was it. I lifted the radio, my thumb finding the playback button. "I'm not here about the land today, Preston," I said, my own voice echoing back at me, steadier than I felt. "I'm here about my dog." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Preston's smile twitched. I pressed the button. A staticky, strained voice crackled from the radio speaker, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yeah, it was Preston. He paid me half up front, Said the old man was a fool for tying up his cash in that mutt's trust. Said if the dog went missing, the trust would fail, and he could finally force the sale of the waterfront lots. He wanted the dog taken way up coast, said to use the old trapper's shack. The recording went on, detailing the plan to take my boy, to break my spirit, to make me sell. The crowd's murmur turned into a wave of shocked gasps and angry mutters. I saw people I'd known my whole life turn their stares on Preston, their expressions hardening. The color drained from Preston's face, then flooded back in a wave of crimson rage. The careful, wealthy facade shattered. He lunged for the radio, but I stepped back, holding it high. "You little worm," he snarled, forgetting the microphone entirely, his voice raw and ugly for all to hear. "You think you can prove anything with that? The man who gave this confession," I said, speaking clearly to the town, "was identified by the unique pocket watch he pawned for drinking money. The watch you gave him as a down payment, Preston. It's in evidence now." Cornered, with the truth ringing in the salty air, and the eyes of the entire community upon him, Preston exploded. He jabbed a shaking finger at me, spitting his words. "That money was mine, all of it. The land, the marina revenue. It should have been mine years ago, not tied up in vet bills and kibble for that mutt." A dead silence fell over the festival green. In his furious, unthinking rant, he'd said it all. He'd admitted to the motive, to the greed, to seeing a living, breathing soul as nothing but a financial obstacle. The confession on the radio was one thing, but this public, venomous outburst, this was the true reveal. I just stood there, the radio silent in my hand, watching as the man who thought he owned our town finally, truly, lost it all. The sheriff's hand on Preston's shoulder wasn't gentle. I watched, my breath fogging in the cold New England air, as the cuffs clicked shut. All that bluster, all that polished charm, evaporated like morning mist. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the gravel of my driveway, his whole future narrowing down to the backseat of a patrol car. "Conspiracy, attempted theft," the sheriff was saying, his voice flat and official. "We heard enough. You have the right to remain silent." Molly, standing beside me, let out a long, shaky breath she must have been holding for weeks. She'd been the one to quietly call the sheriff after our last conversation at the library, suggesting he might want to listen in today. I owed her more than just my thanks. As they led Preston away, a strange silence settled over the property. It wasn't peaceful, not yet, but the oppressive weight of his scheming was finally gone. The deputy closed the car door, and that was it. His reputation, his standing, all of it, ruined. Not by some grand dramatic fight, but by the cold, hard consequences of his own greed. Molly turned to me, her eyes wide. "The diary, Silas?" He was so sure. He thought he had it all figured out. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat, my fingers finding the familiar worn leather. I pulled out my great-grandfather's diary. "He did figure it out," I said, handing it to her. "Or, he figured out the story I needed him to find." She opened it carefully, flipping to the last written page, the one detailing a ridiculous fake clause about a fortune left to a long-dead dog. "You wrote this?" After the first time he came just visiting, asking a few too many questions about the property lines, I got suspicious, I explained. I knew the real, sensible Will was safe with my lawyer in town. Always has been. So I hid the real diary and made this entry. I needed to see who would come sniffing for a bone that wasn't there. She traced the fresh ink with her finger, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You baited a trap with the family heirloom." "I protected it," I corrected softly, taking the book back. Its true value was in the mundane, daily records of a life lived well. Weather reports, crop prices, my great-grandmother's birthday. Not in some fabricated treasure. I let him see exactly what a man like him would want to see, a loophole, a secret, a way to take what wasn't his. We watched the taillights of the sheriff's car disappear down the wooded road. The quiet that returned now felt different. It was just the wind in the pines and the distant cry of a crow. The fight was over. The real Will, dividing the land fairly among the family, would stand. And the diary, with its false page now a testament to a greed that failed, was back where it belonged. In my hands, a real piece of history, not a weapon. The late afternoon sun paints the harbor in streaks of gold and orange, and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I can simply sit and watch it. My rocking chair creaks a familiar, comforting rhythm on the porch of my little cottage. Salty is a warm, solid weight across my feet, his breathing a steady metronome of contentment beside me. Out in the bay, the fishing boats are coming in, their diesel engines a low hum against the cry of the gulls. Winter. Harbor is breathing easy again. It's been weeks since the storm, both the literal one and the one Preston brought with his greed. The town feels restored, the lingering tension that had coiled around our wharves and whispers finally dissolved. I hear he's facing a long list of legal consequences, from fraud to attempted theft. The system is slow, but it's turning. His name is rarely spoken here now, and when it is, it's with a shake of the head, a lesson learned about the poison of mistaking ambition for legacy. My true legacy is sitting across town, probably shelving books with that quiet, efficient grace of hers. Molly. She stopped by earlier with a fresh loaf of banana bread, her smile no longer shadowed by worry. We didn't talk about Preston or the diary. We talked about the new biography of John Adams she'd ordered for the library, and whether Salty was getting too many treats. It was perfect. Speaking of the diary, it rests on my lap now. Its worn leather warm from the sun. I found it, of course, right where Molly's quick thinking had told me to look, tucked behind a loose stone in the old lighthouse foundation. Preston never stood a chance against the two of us. I open it to the last page, the blank one that has been waiting for a true conclusion. I take my pen from my shirt pocket. The words come easily. Finally, a truth earned not through battle, but through peace. I write them slowly, letting the ink settle. Legacy isn't in what you leave, but in who you trust to guard it. I close the book, my fingers tracing the embossed cover. It's not a record of land deeds or hidden fortunes. It's a story of this place, of my grandfather's love for it, and now of how it was protected. And I realize with a deep, settled certainty that I have my own chosen family to guard it with. A librarian with a spine of steel and a heart of gold, and a scruffy dog who thinks I hung the moon. This porch, this view, this quiet victory, this is the legacy I'm living in. And it is more than enough. Salty sighs in his sleep, his paws twitching. I lean back, watching the last boat dock, and feel the peace of the harbor settle into my very bones. The end.